What's up guys, JP back at you once again. Very excited to be bringing you video number 3 of 12 in my 12-part series chronicling every single film that I watched in the year 2020, well over 500 films. If you missed the first 2 episodes, definitely go back and check them out where I covered every film I watched in January and February. This, of course, will be the March video, and I can tell you right now, this is the most I watched in a month thus far. Not the most out of all the months, we'll get to those later, but this is the most out of the first 3 months. It makes sense. COVID sort of started in March, and I watched a lot more films towards the end of March, the second half, than I did during the first half. As quarantines were rolling through, I was watching a lot of movies. Just a reminder guys, I will be rating these films out of 5 because I am referencing my Letterboxd page and it's just easier to list off my Letterboxd rating. I normally rate out of 10, I think it's a better rating scale, but I digress on that. So in March, I watched 50 movies, which is quite a lot of films in March. It's almost 2 a day. So starting off with the very first film I watched in March, it is Candyman Farewell to the Flesh from the year 1995. Now, the reason that I wanted to check out Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, I had seen it before, but the new Candyman was coming out, and that was the film I was most anticipating in 2020. So I was like, let me check out Candyman 2. I had recently watched Candyman 1. Man, Candyman 2 really held up for me. I really enjoyed what they did with the mythology. They continued the story of Candyman. You get the backstory on him. It has a great, fantastic opening. Setting is really good in New Orleans. I thought this movie was much better than I remembered it, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched Alien from the year 1979. I decided to pop in the 4K that I had for a little while. I always kind of dismiss it. I know that it is a fantastic movie, but I just never think of it as my go-to favorite movie. Well, that's kind of changed. It's not my favorite movie, but it's definitely a go-to, and it's one of my favorite movies. I love the claustrophobic, the darkness. It's probably the best space movie ever. The xenomorph looks crazy good. It's scary. It's just a fantastic horror film. Of course, that is a 5 out of 5. After that, I was kind of on a little bit of a 4K kick because I popped in Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz is an all-time classic. You can't really beat it. It's probably my favorite musical. It's insane how well that film has aged for being a 1939 film. I can't think of really another film from the 30s that is watched and beloved as much today as The Wizard of Oz is. I mean, it's a classic in every generation that comes about. There are kids today that love The Wizard of Oz, and you normally don't get that with a film that old. I think there's a strong case to make that The Wizard of Oz might be the greatest film ever made. And I say that in terms of its longevity and its timelessness. Everybody knows it. Obvious 5 out of 5. Then I stepped back into my 1985 grind. I was prepping for the top 10 horror films of 1985 podcast that I was working on 22 Shots, and I popped in Transylvania 65000, of course from the year 1985. This movie just doesn't do it for me. I've seen it a handful of times and I just don't really care for it that much. It's super campy and cheesy. Some people like it. It's really not my cup of tea. I don't think it's a bad movie. I just think it's kind of average. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then from 1985, Return to Oz. Killed 2 birds with 1 stone with this one. I had just watched The Wizard of Oz and I kind of wanted to see the sequel, and it's also a 1985 film. This movie's really good. It's different from the first film, but it has some sequel-ish type of things going on, but it's really its own thing. It's very dark and super fantasy-esque, very creepy. It's definitely one I'll go back and revisit again and give it another shot. This was a first-time watch for me. It was good, but it didn't blow me away. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then we have Wicked City from the year 1987. This was an anime horror film that I got for Patreon, and I thought this movie was really good. There's some really creepy, weird stuff going on in it. I like the city that it sets up. There's sort of this underworld quality to it that I really liked. It was good. I'm not a huge fan of anime in general, but the horror anime stuff that I've seen is pretty good. The only problem with saying that you enjoyed an anime is then you get like 30 anime recommendations from anime fans. So I try to not say that I liked it too much, but I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we have The Orange Man from the year 2015. This is a super indie slasher comedy. It honestly was kind of funny. I thought that it was overall pretty enjoyable. It's ridiculous and stupid, but it actually had me laughing a little bit. I thought this was much better than it actually probably deserved to be. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then we have Murder Lust from the year 1985. Of course, still in the dive into 1985. I think that might be the first time I actually said that, but that's what we were calling it. This is a film that was released by Intervision, the Severin sub-label. And this is a little bit of a hidden gem. I don't think a lot of people know about this one. It's a little nasty serial killer movie. Reminds you of sort of a Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer type film. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then I went to the theater and checked out Onward from 2020. This is a Pixar film, I believe, or it's Disney. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it's Disney. It's pretty fun. It's about trolls and stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. Kind of like heartfelt and stuff like that, about these two brothers who are on a quest together. I gave that a 4 out of 5. Then we have Mom, M-O-M, Mothers of Monsters from the year 2020. This movie is about a mother who is suspecting her son might be a school shooter in the future, a future school shooter. I didn't care for this one. I thought the concept was great, super poor execution. It was very average. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then we have Martyrs 2015. This was a weird experience. You know, maybe I'll finally check out Martyrs, the remake. I'd never seen it before. I watched it and I was like, this is literally Martyrs Light. It's the light version of Martyrs. Completely pointless remake. I'm usually not completely against remaking a film for American audiences. Let's face it, a lot of people aren't cinephiles like us. They don't want to watch movies with subtitles, so I understand the reason for it, and I'm not against it. And sometimes it even sheds light on the original film. But this one was just a sloppy mess that just seemed so pointless. Because the source material is so strong, I mean, if you look at it as its own film, the source material is so strong that it's, you know, half decent. But I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Funny thing though is I actually watched this movie, and whenever I went to log it, I had it logged before. Martyrs, the remake, is so forgettable, I forgot I had seen it. I watched it back in 2016. Crazy. Then I watched My Truth, The Rape of the Two Coreys from the year 2020. So, I tried to watch this live. It was like a $20 price tag or something like that. Corey Feldman was releasing it, and it was going to be sort of this one release type thing only. He claimed that it got shut down, that people were like hacking the website and stuff. I think that it possibly had to do with the traffic, and it was doing better than they thought. It was a whole mess, but I ended up being able to see it afterwards, thank God, because I didn't want to waste my money. I read Corey Feldman's book a few years ago, and it kind of blew me away. It was like really messed up and crazy, and one of the coolest, most interesting autobiographies I had ever read. So I knew a lot of this stuff that was in the documentary, but it was very powerful. And Corey Feldman gets a lot of crap and stuff like that, but if this in fact is true, I would really like to see these people brought to justice if possible. Really feel bad for Corey Haim and what happened to him. It's a really messed up situation. Very informative documentary, even though I knew a lot of the information. I gave that a 3.5 out of 5. Back into the dive into 1985, we have Godzilla 1985, of course, from the year 1985. I enjoyed this. It was fun. I never thought I would be a Godzilla fan, but I pretty much have liked most of the ones I've seen. I've kind of peppered them in throughout all the years and stuff like that, but they're pretty good movies. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched Psychos in Love from the year 1987. It's sort of a comedy film about two serial killers. They meet and fall in love. It's pretty fun. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then I watched Night of Horror from the year 1981. This movie is atrocious. It's like, I think it was sort of like Civil War ghosts or something. I can't remember. It was garbage. Half the movie's them driving around in an RV. Half star out of 5. Then, because it was March, Friday the 13th, of course I popped in a Friday the 13th. I decided to go with the original this time, from the year 1980. The original Friday the 13th is one in the series that was not my favorite in the series, and it still isn't, but over time it's really climbed its way up into the upper echelon of how I rank the series. It's very good. I love the atmosphere in it, which is something that I kind of neglected in the past. It is a 4.5 out of 5. Then I watched Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. I want to say that Joe Bob and Darcy were doing like a watch along, and I think I watched it during that. It was pretty fun. You know, those guys are awesome and they're fun to listen to. Plus, I'm a huge fan of Friday the 13th Part 4. Absolutely love it. It's my favorite Friday the 13th. Also a 4.5 out of 5. Then I went all the way back to the year 1960 for what some people consider to be the very first slasher film, in Peeping Tom. Now, I don't think that this film is a slasher film. A proto-slasher film, sure, like sort of a prototype to the slasher film, influenced the slasher film. We'll go with that. This is a pretty solid movie though. I really enjoyed it. First time watch for me. It was on my bucket list, so I had to get to it. It was definitely a blind spot. I give it a 4 out of 5. Back with the dive into 1985, we have The Ripper, and this is a Tom Savini starring movie, kinda, not really. I found it fun. It wasn't great, but it's sort of this Jack the Ripper type tale thing. I enjoyed it. 2.5 out of 5. Then it was time for St. Patrick's Day, and as a huge Leprechaun fan that I am, I was sure to pop in at least one Leprechaun film, and we decided to go with the original from the year 1993. I usually go in order, so I'll watch Leprechaun during St. Patrick's Day, and then the next St. Patrick's Day I'll continue where I left off until I cycle all the way through, back to the first one again. And so we're on the first one here. Such a fun movie. I grew up with it. The Leprechaun actually scared me a lot when I was a kid. It's a classic in my opinion. I know why some people don't like it. They can't take it serious. I've always kind of found the Leprechaun to be goofy, but still able to be serious. I know that's crazy as it sounds, but I love the original. I give that a 3.5 out of 5. I did manage to squeeze in one more Leprechaun film from 1994. We have Leprechaun 2. As much as I love the first Leprechaun film, I seem to gravitate towards the sequels more. I think the first one is probably the second best in the series, but I tend to watch the sequels, or want to watch the sequels more, and I think it's because I've seen the first one so many times, but I've seen them all a lot of times, honestly. Leprechaun 2 is a lot of fun, has some horrendous acting in it, but I love the film. Morty is such a fun character. 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched VFW from the year 2019. This is Joe Begos' follow-up from last year's success, which was Bliss. This film is pretty awesome. Of course, it's getting its wide release in 2020. It reminds me of like Assault on Precinct 13 or one of those early Carpenter films. It feels very reminiscent of those. A bunch of Vietnam veterans are held up in a VFW starring Stephen Lang. William Sadler's in there, Fred the Hammer Williamson, and there's a bunch of these sort of punk, drug addict, mutant type guys trying to break in and get their drugs back. It's a lot of fun. I really, really love this movie. It was definitely a highlight of the year. I gave it a 4 out of 5. Then I checked out Holla from the year 2006. I don't really remember this one too much. It was sort of this urban horror film, slasher thing. It's very loose in my memory, but I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Then I checked out Wait Until Dark from the year 1967. This one kind of blew me away a little bit. Definitely a highlight watch for me this year. It's more of like a thriller. It's about this blind chick and this thrilling setup. Lots of suspense in this one. I really loved it. 4.5 out of 5. Dive into 1985. The Strangeness from the year 1985. This one, was this the one where they're underground in the cave and you can't really see anything? Kind of a bad transfer. I don't remember. I thought that it was okay, but I couldn't really see anything. I remember having trouble seeing it, but it was fun. 2.5 out of 5. Then we have The Innocents, 1961. Kind of wanted to see this because it was based off The Turn of the Screw and considered the best adaptation. I think I just come around to the fact that I don't really like The Turn of the Screw story. I mean, I thought the movie was good. I just wasn't really connecting with the story. But it's still a good movie. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then for movie number 99, I watched Slimy Little Bastards, which is directed by the homie, my podcast co-host, Dave Parker. I don't remember a whole lot about it. Super independent, obviously. And I remember that it, was sort of a homage to the Little Creature films of the 80s. I didn't think it was particularly good, but for a do-it-yourself, it was enjoyable, especially because Dave is my friend and I like to see what he did. I gave it a 1.5 out of 5, but hey, I mean, it's no money movie. Then for movie 100, we have The Bad Seed from the year 1985. This is actually a remake of The Bad Seed, and I had never really seen this or even really knew that it existed. It was a TV film. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty good little redo there, especially for a TV film. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then we have The Platform from the year 2019. Of course, it got its wide release in the year 2020. And this was a major success for me. I loved this movie. I thought it was super creative, super interesting. I loved the allegory with like the trickle-down effect economics and stuff. Super, super cool movie. It was a Netflix film. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. It's a little nasty too. Really love this movie. A solid 4 out of 5. We got Thou Shall Not Kill ... except. 1985 this one was. I don't really remember it, honestly. I think I watched it with a Facebook group, like me and a few other people did like a live watch on Facebook. I remember it being kind of action oriented, but yeah, that's about all I remember. I gave that a 3 out of 5 though. Then we got Super Size Me 2 Holy Chicken from 2017. This just popped up in my YouTube recommendations and I was kind of like, I like the first one. Let's see what a sequel to a documentary is like. And this is a Morgan Spurlock documentary about him opening a fast food restaurant. It was kind of interesting, honestly. Definitely kind of made me aware of this weird chicken industry, which might not be a good thing because it's kind of gross. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Then I wanted to revisit a great documentary. This is Grizzly Man from the year 2005. Now, Grizzly Man is a super fascinating documentary. It's about this man who went out into the wilderness in Alaska or someplace and he documented grizzly bears. And this guy would get so close to these grizzly bears, it was disturbing. It didn't really end too well for him, and it's very disturbing and shocking. Very good documentary though. I give that a 4 out of 5. Then I watched Biohazard from the year 1985. Don't remember it, but I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then I watched Naked Vengeance from the year 1985. Now, this was actually pretty fun. It's a rape revenge movie, but it is absolutely absurd. Like, I remember the plot just being like, okay, this is completely far-fetched and ridiculous, but yet still, I couldn't stop watching the screen because of how absurd it was. Every single guy in this movie is a complete scumbag. But I really enjoyed this one. 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched Surviving the Game from the year 1994. This is a film that I pop in usually once a year. I absolutely love it. It stars Ice-T. It's a most dangerous game sort of story. People hunting people. Gary Busey's in it. Rutger Hauer's in it. It's just completely awesome. We're going bare hands. If If you know that quote, you're awesome. If you don't, you're not awesome. Watch Surviving the Game. It's great. 4 out of 5. Then I watched The Hunt, which was like people hunting people, but with political satire. Okay, it was good. It was funny. 4 out of 5. Then, I believe Stuart Gordon died, which was horrible, but I decided to watch Reanimator in honor of him and because it was from 1985. Reanimator is a classic. I didn't really love it when I first seen it, but it's definitely grown on me. I believe it made my top 10 of 1985. And it is a very good movie. Jeffrey Combs very cool in it. Just a good, gory, ridiculous movie. 4 out of 5. Then I watched Altered from the year 2006. I know that some of the Blair Witch guys was involved in this. I don't know which one. Maybe Eduardo Sanchez. This movie was actually pretty cool, man. A lot of practical effects in it. I feel like the characters were a little bit boring and could have added a little bit more charisma to them, and this movie would have been amazing, but it was still pretty good. 3.5 out of 5. Then I watched The Room 2019. Starts off good. It's a be careful what you wish for. Kind of let me down a little bit. 2.5 out of 5. Then I watched the entire mini-series documentary of Tiger King. I mean, who didn't at this time? It was like just what we needed in that moment of COVID. It was amazing. Like, I loved it. It was crazy. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, how do Netflix come up with these series? Like, how do they find this stuff? How is there footage of all this? How is there this much footage? It was amazing. 4 out of 5. Did I really only give that a 4 out of 5? I feel like it should be a 5 out of 5. You know what? I'm going to change my rating right now to a 4.5 out of 5. I meant to hit 5, but it didn't work, so we're going 4.5 out of 5. Then we have The Crazies from the year 1973. This is Romero being like way ahead of his time again. Of course, during this time I started watching infection movies, as did like most of the world, back in March and April and so on. Romero's super ahead of his time, man. He was just a genius, dude. He was amazing. Rest in peace to Romero. One of the true greats. 4 out of 5. Then I watched a trio of documentaries. First up, Paradise Lost, the child murders at Robin Hood Hills from the year 1996. Now, I'd seen this documentary before, but I'd never seen the sequels, so I wanted to change that, but I had to start with the original one first. This documentary is absolutely amazing about these 3 kids who were arrested and charged with the murder, the gruesome, horrific mutilation murder of these 3 little boys. It's a tough one to watch. Yeah, you kind of go back and forth. You're like, they did it, they didn't do it, they did it, they didn't do it. I don't believe they did it. 5 out of 5 on that one. Then I finally got around to checking out Paradise Lost 2 Revelations, which is the follow-up. And this one really sort of goes deeper into the stepfather and some other people. And then I believe that they didn't do it. And then I believe they did do it. And then I was like, they definitely didn't do it. And then I was like, they freaking did it. And then I was like, no, they didn't do it. What am I talking about? I give Paradise Lost 2 a 4 out of 5. Then on to Paradise Lost 3, Purgatory from the year 2011. These films really do span a long amount of time, all of which these kids were in prison. It's definitely a case that at the end of the day, after the third one, I believe they did not do it. They have since been released, which is incredible. I gave Paradise Lost 3 a 4.5 out of 5. Then on to 28 Days Later from the year 2002. I wanted to revisit this one, perhaps one of the better infection films ever made. It's very fast paced. It has like the running infected zombie type creatures. I know they're technically not zombies, but it plays out like a zombie film. Man, that score is epic too. I give that a 4.5 out of 5. Then on to Jeepers Creepers from the year 2001. I'm not going to really speak on the director. We all know the story, but the film itself, if I just take the film, I absolutely love it. I think that it's absolutely terrifying. It's always one that has scared me. I think the Creeper is such a creepy, no pun intended, character, and it's an effective horror film. At a time where we weren't really getting new monsters, this is a monster film, and I give it a 4.5 out of 5. Then I watched Jeepers Creepers 2 from the year 2003. And I thought this was a pretty decent follow-up as well. It's still really scary. The scene in the bus where the creeper is outside the window just sends shivers up my spine. I gave that a 4 out of 5. Then I finally got around to seeing the third Jeepers Creepers film, which is Jeepers Creepers 3 from the year 2017. I've heard nothing but bad things about this movie, and I'll just be honest, I didn't not like it. I actually did like it. The budget is definitely very trimmed compared to the other two films, but I thought that it was pretty good. I mean, there's some bad CGI elements to it and stuff like that, but overall I really like the story. It fits nicely between Jeepers Creepers 1 and 2, and I actually thought it was alright. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Then on to Mad Max from the year 1979. Now, I've always been a fan of The Road Warrior and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. I also really liked the Fury Road film that came out a few years back. But the original Mad Max I never was able to really get into, so I decided to give it a real fair shot. And let me just say that I do think it's a pretty decently made movie. I just really can't get into it like I can the other films. It's something entirely different. I thought it was good, but not really my cup of tea. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. And then the final film I watched in March was 28 Weeks Later from the year 2007. Now, this is one that I remember I watched years and years and years ago. I picked it up on DVD with the first film, and I remember the opening being really good and then not being interested in the film pretty much at all after that. I don't know for sure if I actually ever finished it, so I decided to actually finish it this time for sure, and I thought it was pretty good. It definitely was better than I remembered, and I watched the whole thing this time for sure. It's a pretty solid follow-up to the first film. I'm still hoping one day we can get 28 months later, or would it be years later at this point? Who knows? But yeah, that would be cool to see one day. But for 28 Weeks Later, I gave it a 4 out of 5. And with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of every film that I watched in the year 2020. This was March. There were 50 total movies. And I can tell you guys that next month in April was the most films that I watched in a month. So look forward to that. Hope you guys are enjoying this series. It takes a lot of time to produce, and I think that it's really fun though. So hopefully you guys watch it. Let me know what you thought about my thoughts, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.